Second meeting of the Referrals Committee shall come to order. And we will begin by asking the chair to take the roll. Councilmember Ravel?
Here.
Councilmember Fleming?
Here.
And I don't know how to do this, but I'm here as well. So with 3 members present, we have a quorum and are prepared to do our work. Our next item on the agenda is public comment. Is there any member of the public seeking to give comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to our agenda. Before we get to item 4, which is the purpose of this meeting, which is to say the review and scheduling of referrals, I just want to do a quick recap from our previous meeting. Councilmember Ravel followed up as we had asked her to by sending an updated rubric, let's say. We'd talked last week about having an agenda item where we would vote to send that to the whole city council. In fact, it's not necessary for us to take a vote as long as everyone on this committee is in agreement that that draft is ready to be sent to the full rules committee. Is everyone comfortable with that?
Yes.
Okay. Additionally, we received a referral form from staff that is I now believe been tested. That if someone fills it out, we get an email, and I believe the clerk gets an email as well. So I would suggest that if everyone's comfortable, that one of us should also send that form to the whole council to make them aware of it, to demonstrate that that is now the way that referrals are made, and to see if they have any concerns. Everyone okay with that?
Yeah, although I think the city manager did send it over in an email, but we might want to send just some kind of narrative about it. Okay,
that's a good, I sometimes don't notice who else is copied on the emails I receive, but good point, thank you. The last loose end from last week is we talked about needing to kind of add some columns to this tracker document. I have treated this tracker document like it's some kind of very brittle, delicate, ancient work of art that if I touch it, something terrible will happen. Are folks comfortable with me just adding the 2 columns we discussed to the tracker so that we can begin to potentially fill them out during the course of our work today?
Yeah, although maybe just for the public, we should say what those columns are.
Yeah, so those one of them is the score that we would work on together, and the other is the recommended time frame. And so really our committee's work is to, and for those of you following at home, I can actually even number the columns. Our committee's work is to populate column F, which is the name of the committee that something would go to, and then to populate the new columns H and I, which have a score and a recommended timeline. So I've now done that, and no lightning came down from the sky, so I think we're in good shape. And so I think that cleans up all the loose ends from last time, required for us to be ready to go into item 4, which is the review and scheduling of referrals. Does anyone have anything else they want to discuss before we get to item 4? Councilmember Ravel?
So for the timeline, do we have sort of an idea? As I recall, last meeting you were saying 60 days, or I don't know. So do we want to have, I mean, for example, if we thought something was, it got a good score and it was ready to go, and we would say we'd like to see it on an agenda within 30 days, and then a little bit less pressing 60 days. Or do we have an idea of what we mean by timeline?
Yeah, I mean, my bias here, which is pretty strongly held, is the simpler the better.
Okay.
Like, maybe now, like now or not now, or immediately or soon, or, immediately or soon but not immediately, or later. And I'm not saying that needs to be the right answer, but I think the more simplicity, the fewer options we give ourselves. I think if it's a short answer rather than a multiple choice, then we're going to, in my experience, in that situation, you generate more and more and more different options. And so my recommendation would be we pick a small list of options to choose between.
If we did just 30, 60, 90, or is that going against what you're? I think the other thing in my mind, that we still are not clear on at the city manager referrals, we talked about that, but the things that are coming from the city manager's office, having an understanding of what those things are. Because if we say this needs to go in, next meeting or within the next 30 days, we also don't know what's already on the pending calendars. And then to your point the other day is we don't know what's coming in from the committees. So if we think something can go now, maybe it can, but aside from Bill's list and a couple of regular things, I don't know what else the city manager is putting on the calendar. And we probably need to have a way to see what that is without having to reference the city manager's report every week.
Right. I'm happy to do this anyway, but my instinct is maybe we start and go through the list. I think this conversation will be more useful when we're doing it than when we're talking about it in theory. Is that okay with both of you?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think, as I see it, we have three types of work to do that I think come in chronological order. The first is there's just a couple items on the list that don't have a committee at all. In other words, column F is vacant. A couple near the bottom that are from council members Reed and Fleming, and then one in the middle, which is from Councilmember Burns in row 28. So I would say we should maybe begin by doing that, and then we can begin to work on scoring.
All right, and can you just name what the maybe title is as we're going through, because I don't have the numbers.
Yeah, so the first one is HWE, which is Healthy Workforce Environment Policy from Councilmember Burns.
Yes, so that one is going, and I know this because I am the chair, and we had this conversation in light of the beach situation, so that one's going to be on Human Services actually in August.
Oh, so it's scheduled.
It is scheduled, again, because he had made this referral back in May. It obviously is a big piece of our beach discussion. And so there was a conversation about getting that one on the calendar, like right now.
Okay.
And so as the chair, I decided it can go in August because the calendar is fairly light for that committee.
Okay, so do we want me to just implement those changes in this spreadsheet, or do we need to vote on something?
I can do either way. I'm happy to make a motion that the HWE policy referred by Councilmember Burns back in May 15 be scheduled for the Human Services Committee for the August meeting.
Is there a second?
Second, and we have a date for that, right? August.
Yes, in
something.
my mind.
And just to be a pedantic monster, I think probably we're not really, that's fine because it's happening anyway, but probably we're not allowed to really affirmatively schedule a date.
Right, yes.
But I think
that committee only meets once a month.
Right, okay.
So it's a little easier we could just say August is fine. And again, it was just more so in light of
All right,
recent events.
So Councilmember Fleming moves that the Healthy Workplace Environment Policy referral be sent to the Human Services Committee for consideration immediately. Councilmember Ravel seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, Councilmember Ravel?
Aye.
Councilmember Fleming?
Aye.
I vote aye on a 3-0 vote. The motion passes, and I'm going to implement it live. So I click on Human Services in column F, and recommended timeline is, I'm just going to write immediately for lack of, I guess I can, whatever. I write immediately there. Do you happen to know the date off the top of your head?
I believe it is on August the 2nd. Let's see. August the 2nd, it should be right after Rules Committee.
August 2nd, 2021. Okay. Okay. So that brings us now there are two items on this spreadsheet right next to each other from Councilmember Reed that look like they're both regarding the vote threshold regarding changes in the office of city manager. By the way, I should say the clerk is in this spreadsheet, so she's perhaps, I guess, not watching live, but perhaps following what we're doing. And the city manager will be here in about 10 minutes. So there's two different referrals here that read sort of similar. One says referral to make adjustments to that threshold in the future, a 7-vote threshold. And the other says referral to change the threshold for hiring and firing the city manager to 6 votes of the corporate, it says corporate free, but I assume it means corporate body. So I think the first one I'm not understanding fully. The second one, I think we understand what it means. It would seem to me that the second one probably should go to the Rules Committee. Does that seem right?
Yes, I agree.
And the first one, we may want to flag to just confirm that Councilmember Reed was only intending to send one, and if not, understand what the difference is between them. But I would entertain a motion to send the second of these two to the Rules Committee.
I move that motion. Are we given a timeline?
Definitely not yet. I was going to,
Okay.
with the exception of the one that was already been scheduled, I think we should do the scoring before we do any timeline
Okay,
work.
perfect. So I second that. This goes to Rules Committee.
Did you second your own motion?
I'm sorry, I made the motion. I made the motion. I heard you say motion, so I thought I was second. Yes, I make the motion that this referral from Councilmember Reed goes to Rules.
Councilmember Fleming makes the motion that the referral in row 41 of the spreadsheet regarding the threshold for hiring and firing the city manager go to the Rules Committee. Councilmember Ravel seconds. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, Councilmember Ravel?
Aye.
Councilmember Fleming?
Aye.
I vote aye. On a 3-0 vote, this goes to the Rules Committee. And the spreadsheet is, the drop downs are broken here, so I'm going to write it down, but also put some punctuation marks to make sure that we fix the drop downs. And I will also make a note to ask Councilmember Reed about the other referral. Okay, and that brings us to Councilmember Fleming's most recent referral from, I believe, this morning even.
But wasn't there a third one from Councilmember Reed about banning water shutoffs?
That already, I don't love that this
Okay.
happened because it shouldn't have without our consent, but it already says AMPW on it, so.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought about that too. We probably should, I didn't know where that came from, so we probably should make sure that when we get that column is empty. I imagine staff is used to populating that. And the one, yes, that I made this morning actually had been made to the council chair some time ago before we were using the system, so I made sure this morning to get it on here.
And so this is regarding understanding how condo conversions are taking place and the impact on displacement and affordable housing loss.
Should be condo deconversions. I could have
Sorry, of course, right.
That's okay. Yeah.
Oops. Yes.
So my thought was that one would go to P&D.
I would think so, right? Yeah. All right. Is there a motion on that?
I move that that item be referred to P&D.
And I can second.
Any discussion? Councilmember Ravel?
Aye.
Councilmember Fleming?
Aye.
I vote aye, and on a 3-0 vote, this item is also sent to Planning and Development. So that brings us to the end of items that needed a name of committee. And so now I think the best way for us to handle this is to go through and deal with scoring. I would say the ones that need to be scored are the ones that do not currently have a scheduled agenda date filled in, right? I think the ones that already have something filled in the column that says scheduled agenda date are kind of out our hands already. And those that don't are the ones that we need to score. Does everyone feel okay about that plan? Okay. Mm-hmm. I'm comfortable just going through this and starting. The first one is mine, I'm afraid, but don't worry, that's the last one that is mine. So, so this is options to make downtown Evanston more walkable. Does anybody want to? And remember, for the audience, there's 5 assessment criteria: time sensitivity, scope, connection to existing policy, community interest, and goals, alignment with goals and priorities. And each one will be given a score between 1 and 3, where the initiator was hoping for a low number, not a high number. So does anybody want to speak to what y'all think about how to score this one?
I gave this one an 8. It feels like we're on American Bandstand or that other show. So for time sensitivity, I had it as a 3. I don't know if how much we want to go into detail here. For scope, I had a 2, so kind of in the middle. Existing policy connection, I have it as a 1. Community interest, I have it as a 1. And then goals and priority, I have it as a 2. I will say goals and priority were a little bit difficult since this council has not set goals and priorities. So I guess I'm thinking about our previous council, but that's something that I, hopefully we'll get to soon.
Did those numbers add up to 9 based on what I heard?
That's probably right. 5, 6, 7. Yeah, that is a 9.
Okay. How does that match with what you put?
Well, I did have a total of 9 as well. And I agree with Councilmember Fleming about the time sensitivity. It's not super time sensitive. A 2 for, demand on staff resources. I gave it a 1 for existing policy because we do address walkability and all those good things. For community interest, I thought this might be something that we address as we're doing our comprehensive general plan or our strategic plan, and it would benefit from, I thought, some community engagement to get the community's ideas about what they thought would help make the downtown more walkable. So I gave that a score, either a 2 or a 3. But I gave it a 1 for the goals and priorities because I do think it's very key to our CARP goals. But I ended up with the same total that Councilmember Fleming did.
Yeah, so you guys agree in columns 1, 2, and 3. So let's not even talk about that. On community interest, I have to say I agree with Councilmember Ravel. We are both on the receiving end of some emails regarding the Shared Streets program that I think make us cognizant of the danger of doing this stuff without adequate community input. So I would reluctantly, but respectfully suggest that we go with a 2 there rather than a 1. And then I'm happy. I don't know, Councilmember Fleming, if you want to accept the flip on those last 2 so that the total winds up being what your total was, and we have it as 3, 2, 1, 2, 1, and it lands at 9, or no?
I guess I'm thinking how important is that, is the thought that we need to come to consensus on the score?
I think the thought is we have to decide ultimately. I think I would suggest that we want to report not 1 number, but 5 numbers adding up to 1 number that we can at least, if necessary, pass with a 2-to-1 vote. It's obviously not an exact science, but yeah, I think ultimately we're going to want to pick a number and move on.
Yeah. So that's fine. I thought this was something that was going to have people would really be interested in, so that's why I gave it a 1.
Oh, that's a 3.
So am I scoring these backwards?
Just that one. So the point of this.
So the
item,
1 is highly likely.
The one.
No.
Are we talking about? So we're talking.
No, just
about,
the scoring in general. Just make sure I didn't do the scoring backwards.
So the issue. So the community interest one is kind of confusing because an issue seems like it's important if people really care about it, but actually that's a reason to slow it down to make sure you have time to get input. So if you think people are super interested, that's good, but it also means we want to give time for real discussion.
So if you think things are really interesting, then you'd give it a 3? No. You give it
a 3. Well, wait. Yep. Sorry.
Yeah,
yes, exactly.
that was my thought, that it was something that we were going to want to do community engagement around.
Yeah, that's why I gave it a 1. But
yeah,
that's actually a 3?
Yeah, it's a 3.
All right, so some of my scoring here might be incorrect.
This is actually a pretty good example, though, of why this is a tricky
Yeah.
thing, because the community engagement may not not want the community engagement to occur before the first committee discussion on it.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, because what it means to me is if there's going to be, if something's high on community engagement, let's say, it would come to a committee meeting first, then the committee would say, oh, this is really great, we need to engage the community. Then we'd engage the community, and it would basically end up entailing multiple committee meetings maybe,
Right.
and staff resources, et cetera, so that's why it gets a big number.
Yeah, no, I get that. I just think in
Yeah.
my brain, I was going 1 is high and 3 is low, where it should have been opposite.
Well, and the problem too is if something's getting a lot of community interest, and that's positive interest, that's good, but it could be gaining a lot of, oh my God, what are you thinking about kind of community interest, and that would be not so good.
Right. Okay, so I'm fine with my score being a 2. I just need to now think through the
Yeah.
rest of my
I mean,
scores.
I am though, I do think it's an interesting, there's a big difference between we shouldn't send this to committee and have a discussion versus we shouldn't enact a policy. And I wonder if we're not quite capturing the right thing.
Well, I mean, my original suggestion was we
Right.
had two different
things.
two different numbers, but
Point taken.
I do think whether it gets community engagement as a positive or negative, it still kind of has the same impact. If it's a positive, we still want to hear what the positive feedback is and make sure we incorporate that. If it's negative, we want to make sure we're not going too fast and we incorporate the negative. It just, my brain read the scoring a little different.
All right, well, for now, are we comfortable giving this a 3-2-1-2-1 for a total of 9 and moving to the next item and continuing this discussion and seeing what else we learn in the course of it?
Yes.
All right, so I would entertain a motion that does that.
So I move that the referral to make downtown more walkable, move forward with a score of 9. It's
I second that.
So Councilmember Fleming votes that we give the referral to make options to make downtown Evanston more walkable a score of 3 + 2 + 1 + 2 + 1 equals 9.
Oh my gosh.
Councilmember Ravel seconds. Seeing no discussion, Councilmember Ravel?
Aye.
Councilmember Fleming?
aye.
I vote aye, and on a 3-0 vote, the motion passes.
And could I just ask why, so it's suggested that it go to economic development because it involves the downtown?
Yeah, I wasn't sure why they did that.
I wasn't sure either. I mean,
Okay,
when I
'cause
made
yeah.
the referral, I sort of said, good morning.
Morning.
I sort of said, I have no idea. I mentioned planning and development as an option. I think I might have mentioned economic development, but I just didn't know, and then it appeared on the spreadsheet as economic development. City manager, sorry, you're perhaps not, perhaps this conversation comes off as totally incomprehensible. We're talking about the referral to make downtown more walkable, which got slotted in economic development. Can you say why that is?
A couple reasons. The first is that it's come up at economic development for several years, and it's both an infrastructure-related question and sort of other amenity-related question. So it could certainly start there and then also go to P&D, and we could have multiple. I mean, it's a broad concept, so I think to be effective, it has to be narrowed, and maybe there's a couple of things that come off of it that might go to each one of those committees.
So then I would say it does make sense to start there if they've already been talking about it.
Great.
But this is where we don't know what they have on their agenda, so even if we say this is immediate, we're not sure necessarily they can get it on immediately because we don't know what else they have that they're already working on. So we brought that up earlier, saying we still need a little more information about committees, just to know if we're overloading their calendars or if someone's going to tell us like, hey, they already have a lot of stuff, they can't get it on next month because we don't have their agendas.
Right. But if we're just prioritizing by committee, then I think we can take the prioritization to the committee and then have them come back and say
Okay.
which month it'll go on based on what else they have on the calendar. That could be one way to look at it.
Great. Shall we look at our next referral?
Yes, although I do have a question.
Yes.
Do we need to vote on each one for the sake of time, or, but I mean, I just don't know what the rules are. Do we need to vote if we make, like that one we just gave a score? Do we need to vote on that score?
I'm happy to just write all the scores in the spreadsheet, and, I mean, the scores are not actionable, so technically we don't need to vote on them at all.
Okay.
It would really be the recommended, whatever types of words we decide we can put in the recommended timeline column. I think the recommended timeline and the council or committee columns require a vote because those are concrete actions the city has to take. The score, we can that's just scratch paper. So good point.
All right, so then we did not do a recommended timeline for that one.
Well, I think it's a little weird to do that with one score. I mean, what does 9 mean so far? Nothing, right?
Okay, all right. I just wanted to be clear.
But I would say let's go through, do all the scoring. Hopefully we can do that quickly enough to have time to talk about timelines. I'm a little skeptical of that, but let's make a run for it.
All right, so I will say for the next one, I'm happy to just move along.
Yeah, this is Councilmember Kelly's halting city property tax levy increases.
I
for the
gave
next
that
couple
an
of years.
8. I'm assuming, so I gave it a 1 for time sensitive, because it has to do with budget, 1 for scope, because it will take some time, 2 for existing policies, when we looked at being fiscally,
Whoa.
am I doing this wrong?
No, you're just sort of mumbling.
I'm sorry, 2 for number 3, which is existing policy, because it goes along with our financial feasibility or whatever that would be considered. Community interest, I just changed that to a 2 now that I understand my scoring part there. And then goals and priority, I also gave it a 2. And again, part of my goals and priority is just, we haven't necessarily made a commitment to all the goals that we have now. So I gave that an 8.
And I gave it a 7, although on number 1 for time sensitivity, I said 1 or 2. Just because I do think it's something we should talk about, as we get into the budget discussion. What would be the demand? I gave it a 2 for 2. I gave it a 1 for 3, because it is, tax levy is kind of an important policy. Community interest, I gave a 2, and goals and priorities. Here I'm taking a guess. I do think the city council would like to not raise the property tax levy, so I gave that a 1. And so basically I'd have a 7 or an 8, depending on how I ended up on number 1 for time sensitivity.
Okay, you guys gave everything different numbers and landed at the same place. That's great. Okay, so I would say the first column on time sensitivity, I think there's close to agreement that it should be a 1. On scope, I would feel more comfortable with a 2 here. Obviously, you could just decide to do this, but to me, this is in the context of a broader budget discussion. I think it's constructive if it's a decision made in the context of what trade-offs it compels, and I think that does require some staff time. So I would vote for a 2 in the second column.
And that wouldn't be, okay, so I think my brain did these backwards. So a lot of staff time would not be a 1?
A lot of staff time would be a 3.
Oh my gosh, okay. Sorry. That's okay, I just wrote it down. Okay. So then I concur.
Then connection to existing policy, it's deeply connected to everything. I guess I'm going to go with a 1 here, personally, I think. Community interest, you guys both said 2. And I think goals and priorities, I think I'd vote for 2. So I just tried to kind of, where there were ties between the two of you, I tried to break the ties, and I landed on 1 for time sensitivity, 2 for scope, 1 for connection to existing policy, 2 for community interest, and 2 for goals/priorities. Also for a total of 8. Are folks okay with that
Yeah, that's
compromise?
fine. That's fine.
Okay. So I'm going to write that down on the spreadsheet. So 1 plus 2 plus 1 plus 2 plus 2 equals 8. And that brings us to the decriminalization of all drugs, which is Councilmember Reed's referral. So does someone want to go first?
So I had that one as a 15, which is,
And I have it as a 14 or a 15, depending on how generous I'm feeling.
Well, so you disagree potentially on one, so what's the one that you're not sure about, Councilmember?
What would be the demand on staff? And, you know, I have no idea, but I would assume.
I mean, I think it's extremely significant because you've got two different complicated problems. One is the legal question, interaction with state and federal law, and one is a literally global search for other policies and consequences. So I feel pretty strong. I don't feel strongly in all these columns, but in the scope column, I do think it really is a 3. I think it's a huge project if you want to do it responsibly.
now the other thing I thought about is it could just be simply a discussion item at Human Services, where staff really doesn't have to put together much of anything in council. I mean, you know, Councilmember Reed could make his case, because I also don't know, I mean, this is a big topic, and I don't really know it, you know, because we didn't have the form, like, is he looking for policy change? I mean, I don't really exactly, not sure what his ultimate goal is. I'd imagine it's a policy change. So we could send this back to him and say, fill out the tracker where we're getting more information. Or I would be open to just saying it could go on a Human Services agenda in the future for just a discussion, and he could explain more what he's thinking, and Human Services can say that's too much, or, you know, so there's a few options, I think.
Well, and this may be one of those issues where we want to see whether there's interest on the part of other members of the city council to even start talking about it, because, you know, then we're going to get articles in the newspaper, we're going to get, you know, hue and cry from the community on all different sides, maybe. I don't know, it just...
So I'm going to respectfully suggest that we keep chugging through, since I think we can agree on the score. I think with the numbers like that, we're probably going to want to go back to the council member and say, hey, you didn't get a great score. Can we focus this? Can you give us more direction, et cetera? But can we just write down the 15 and move on in the interest of time?
Yes.
Okay. So that brings us to Councilmember Kelly's referral on increase in fines for occupancy-related violations. What did folks have for that?
Alderman, why don't you go first? I'm going to make sure my score matches up to.
I had an 8 with a 2 for time sensitivity, a 1 for staff resources, a 1 for existing policy, 2 for community interest, and a 2 for goals and priorities. I mean, there's definitely a lot of community interest in the First Ward, Fifth Ward, and Seventh Ward.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So I had 2 for time, 1 for scope, 1 for connection. You know, I guess unfairly I have a 1 for interest, but just more because it's not in my ward, but I definitely understand other ward priorities. And then for goals, I had a 2. So I'm going to change those a little bit right now. I will give community interest a 2 because I realize I'd kind of judge just based on my own ward.
Okay, well then you guys are in agreement and I am also in agreement. So I'm going to write that down. 2 plus 1 plus 1 plus 2 plus 2 equals 8. This is a funny way to spend a morning. Next is Councilmember Fleming's referral regarding the ADA plan.
Okay, and actually I'm going to remove that one because I just spoke to Laura Biggs, who told me that we are now going to have an ADA plan subcommittee or some such. Is that what it's called? City manager? Yeah. So I was actually going to remove that one because that's already taken place. As well as, and you see these are older staffing of EPD. We already had a conversation at some committee about that. And
so both of those are withdrawn?
So both of those I'm withdrawing.
Without having a way to do that, I'm just going to put strike-throughs in the spreadsheet.
Okay.
Those can be, someone can go back and make that prettier, but they're gone now. It's struck through now. Great. This brings us to Councilmember Ravel's referral regarding bird-friendly provisions in building codes. Go ahead.
Okay. So I've had a direct conversation with city staff about, and it's kind of in the works, and it's just because the International Building Code is something that staff is currently working on. I mean, I don't know when it's going to be ready for P&D, but it's, my understanding, city manager, is kind of in the works. So, I mean, I gave it a 6 for purposes of counting the numbers, but.
But should we strike it since it's already?
I don't know, do we go ahead? I gave it a 1, a 1, a 1, a 2 for community interest, because there are a lot of bird lovers out there, and a 1 for number 5.
Well, so is it already kind of happening?
It is in process, but I don't know the date that it is intended to be on the agenda because it is aligned with the other code changes and they're all traveling together. So.
But I guess my point is that's happening, like that train is moving at some velocity that we're not going to have any influence over. So I don't know how to notate that here, but it seems silly for us to go through the exercise if in fact it's already on a kind of predictable track.
So is there a way, instead of striking it from this, and this would be, I guess, for the clerk or whoever's managing this form, just to make a notation that it's already in progress, with whatever department is working on it?
Sure.
And I'm happy to provide the language for the ADA one as well, just so if people are now following this public process, they know that they just didn't get dropped, they're already being worked on.
Right. I mean, it'd be right to the extent that the community starts tracking the spreadsheet. It'd be good to just say this is being dealt with in this way, and therefore no longer needs to be tracked here.
So Councilmember Ravel and I can provide that to the city manager's office and to the clerk's office so they can update the form. That makes sense. Okay.
The next item is end public distribution of the daily crime bulletin.
So I gave that one a 2 for time sensitivity, a 2 for scope, although maybe not, but I didn't know what the legal part was, so that's why my scope thing was high. I gave it a 3 for policy because I wasn't even sure what the policy was around that. Community interest, and my backward scoring, I gave that the wrong score, so I'll give that a 2. Then I gave it a 3 for goals, so that would be 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Is that right?
Yep. That's 2, 2, 3, 2, 3 gets you to 11.
I got up to 10.
Okay. And what was your?
A 3, a 1, a 2, a 1, and a 3.
For the love of God.
Well, what did you give it? And then we'll just.
I think on time sensitivity, I do agree that it's a 3. On scope, I mean, I actually do agree that it's a 1 on scope. I think it's a relatively doable thing. On connection to existing policy, I think it's a 2. On community interest, I think it's a 2, and on goals and priorities, I'll defer to the two of you who both gave it a 3. So that I landed on 3, 1, 2, 2, 3. Again, as a kind of a compromise, which is also 11.
All right, and I will give the same caveat I did before. I am interested in the topic, and would be happy to discuss it just as a discussion item that doesn't really, again, include so much staff time. I don't know if we want to start the policy where we say, if you have another council member who's willing to support this, it can go on for discussion. But, I mean, I'm personally interested, so I would be happy to have it as discussion to see just what the discussion is on human services.
Yeah, and this is another item that I don't think requires a lot of preparation for a discussion.
Right, and probably not even as big as, the discriminalization, obviously the drugs one is the whole bigger one. This one, I think you would get some public feedback, which might help us to figure out what the next steps would be. But I guess I say that to say if it's an 11 and it won't get on the agenda at all just based on that score, I am willing to have the conversation.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And again, our goal is not to be mechanical or robotic about what we do with these numbers. They're guides, and we want to make judgments that actually make sense. Okay, next is the overlay zone public access cutoff fee.
So for this one, I did not give a score because I simply did not understand what it was.
I have to confess, I did not either.
Okay.
I gave it a 13, based on what I think I understand.
Can you tell us what that is?
3 for time sensitivity, 2 for scope, maybe even 3.
No, but what does it mean?
I think it means there's one stretch along the lakefront where there is a path, except the homeowners have placed gates or fences to block the public from walking along that path. And I don't know whether the path is private property or city property. So
Well, for this story to make sense, it's got to be private property, right? It can't be
well,
the case that
well,
residents are.
I don't know.
Maybe Ms. Dorley can tell us.
I remember when, excuse me, Councilmember Reed made this referral, and the way that he described it was that there is lakefront property along the lakefront, and if you own a house along the lakefront, that means that beach is not accessible to the public, and therefore there should be some sort of fee that those homeowners would pay. But I think you're correct, it's private property to a certain extent.
So when people buy a home that has beach access, because now I'm thinking of just north of, I guess just south of, what's the name of the park that I proposed for the dog park that went down in flames at the beach. They do have gates and they do have beaches, but do we sell them that beach space when they buy their house?
We never owned it to begin with.
I mean, I think that's governed by state law, that the state owns up to the high tide line or the I don't know how we define that in Illinois, but and I don't know about so the public has access, guaranteed access up to the high tide line. But I don't know if the resident actually owns the beach then behind that or not. It's a big.
It's an interesting question.
Okay.
But anyway, so I thought, so a 3 for time sensitivity, a 2 or maybe a 3 for staff resources, because I think there'd be a lot of legal investigation, a 3 for existing policy, a 2 for community interest, and a 3 for goals, priorities.
And so I just gave it an 11, a 3 for sensitivity, 2 for scope. I could also go 3 for scope. 2 for existing policy if we're concerned about the beach and the lakefront and so on and so forth. 2 for interest, and then I have it as a 2 for goals.
And if you look at, so I had it as a 3 for time sensitivity, 2 for scope, 2 for connection to existing policy, 3 for community interest, and 2 for goals as well. If you kind of look at where we kind of average out, it's 3 and then 3, 2, 2, 2, 2 for a total of 10.
Wait, 3, 2, 3, what? So you talk your numbers again.
3, 2, 2, 2, 2 is the kind of average, which I think is also actually exactly what Councilmember.
Gets to 11.
Sure does. Sure does.
See, that's why you don't listen to my math.
Sure does. Good Lord.
All right, well, I can tell you the next one, Councilmember Reed and I are on equity and empowerment. He did present this information to them at this meeting, at our past meeting. So I don't.
So that's already moving as well.
It was a little unclear whether or not they were going to pick it up as a project, but they had some interest. So I would say that we should probably not score that one.
Right, okay.
I think it will start there.
Well, it sounds like it already has.
Well, it was proposed. It wasn't accepted, but yes.
But I mean, I think that's sort of when once another committee is doing something, we've handed it off, right?
Right, I just say that because there was lots of conversation. If they decide they do not want to do it, it might
Right.
come back to us and be proposed for
Understood.
APW or something.
Understood. In the squad room report,
Yeah, so I would say that this is more of a discussion item. Because I just wanted to know kind of where it came from and why we do it and who reviews it and that kind of stuff. There were a couple comments about it and months passed by residents in my ward. So I'm not at the point of like wanting it to be on for an actual policy, just more so of a discussion. But anyway, in my own scoring, I gave it a 12, which was a 2 for time sensitivity. I had app backwards actually, so that's going to be a 1 for scope, so it's not a 12, I'm sorry. Existing policy, I have it as a 3 because I'm not even sure what the policy is. Community interest, I have it as a 1 because I've only heard from a few people, but I have an interest. And then goals I have is a 3, so that would be an 11, I guess.
I think 10.
A 10.
And I wasn't sure what was the intent, so I
Yeah.
didn't score it. So I'm happy with your Councilmember Fleming score.
Yes, as am I. So I'm going to mark it as 2 plus 1 plus 3 plus 1 plus 3 equals 10. And that brings us to city services for reentering community members.
All right, this is also something that my goal was for a discussion, to see, we had this discussion several years ago in Human Services, just seeing where we are as a community. So anyway, so time sensitivity, I have it as a 1, and part of that was because I made the referral back in May, and it's kind of a follow-up. I did want us, on another note, kind of consider the referrals that have been here for a long time, kind of
Yeah,
being
agreed.
moved up. For scope, it's actually a 1. For connection to existing policy, it is, I think, a 2. For community interest, I think it would maybe be a 2. And then for goals, our current goals is probably a 3. So that's 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Well, since I didn't think about time sensitivity in the same way, I'm happy to go with Councilmember Fleming's score.
Okay, I'm comfortable with that as well. So 1 plus 1 plus 2 plus 2 plus 3 equals 9. And now we come to sort of a complicated one, which is a resolution for hiring of positions in the 2021 budget from Councilmember Kelly. I know what she initially said was requiring council approval on a case-by-case basis for the rehiring of people into frozen positions. That's at least what I think she said when she made the referral in a council meeting. I understand she's had a lot of discussions with staff since then. Can you tell us what the status of this proposal is?
I know there's been a lot of conversations with the law department staff about how exactly we could bring this back that would be under the purview of the council, and I don't think there's been a final resolution on that yet.
And I had not scored it because I wasn't exactly sure what it meant.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was basically we would have to approve every time a frozen position was unfrozen, which, as stated, is definitely not the city council's purview. I certainly agree with that. So the question is there something in there that would be? And it sounds like there's not a clear answer yet.
So maybe we leave it because it's already a discussion that staff is working on. And then we could just ask for maybe a staff memo once they figure it out.
Well, or an update to the referrals committee about what aspects of this are appropriate to move to some committee discussion.
I'm fine with that too.
Okay. Great. That moves us down to the board up policy that Councilmember Burns requested.
Eleanor, I'm going to redo my numbers now with the new
I gave that a 2 for time sensitivity, a 1 for staff resources, a 1 for existing policy, a 1 for community interest. I'm sorry, I was muted here. And a 3 for goals and priorities, basically an 8. And I know I think there's a lot of interest in parts of the community in this issue.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I also gave it an 8, so I gave it a 1 for time, 1 for scope, 1 for connection to policy, 2 for community, and 3 for goals.
Okay, so you got to the same number, and I think if you're both comfortable, I would land, I think, with the Councilmember Fleming's 11123. Is that all right, Councilmember Ravel?
Sure.
And that does add up to 8, as both of you did. And then we have the review of the landlord-tenant process, also a Councilmember Burns referral.
I gave that a 9, 1 for time, 2 for scope, 2 for connection, 2 for community, and 2 for goals.
And I think I ended up with 8, but pretty close. So a 2 for time sensitivity, 2 for scope, 1 for existing policy, 2 for community interest, and a 1 for goals and priorities.
And that's fine with me.
But it's, yeah.
Okay, great. So I'll mark that down then, and that's 2 plus 2 plus 1 plus 2 plus 1 equals 8. It is 10 o'clock, but we have just a few left, so let's see if we can power through them quickly. The next is ComEd transmission lines.
I was not sure what that meant.
Yeah. Although I gave it a 10.
Go ahead.
There's a lot of discussion around the transmission lines that run mostly through the 5th Ward, overhead ones, about burying them, and there's been conversations in the past with ComEd and with APW about how we would fund that, whether we would put it on, spread it across the city and put it on people's power bills, or if the city would offset a portion of it by paying down some of it, and then the community would absorb the rest. But basically, the majority of these lines run through the 5th and the 2nd Ward and could and should be buried.
All right, so, and this has been a discussion already, somewhat?
I don't know that it's been a widespread public discussion, but certainly been a discussion between the council members and staff over the course of the last 5 or 10 years.
And so would this be a TIF eligible kind of expense?
I believe so, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So then with that said, I give it an 8. I do think it would be time sensitive since it's been an ongoing conversation, and given that we've talked about with racial inequities, I think 2 for scope, maybe even probably 3 for scope, but 1 for existing policy with CARP and everything else, 3 for community interest, and a 2 for goals. And I could even go 1 with goals if I do directly for CARP, but I know that there is a cost as well.
I'm happy with Councilmember Fleming's.
Yeah, I had relatively similar numbers as well, so I can just. So that gives it. Ooh, that's not how you type. 1 plus 2 plus 1 plus 3 plus 2 equals 9. Then the next is the local hiring requirement from Councilmember Burns.
So I was on MWEBE last night, and I get off a little bit early, but there was some conversation that started around this. So I would say maybe, I gave it a 7, but I would say maybe let's skip that one. I'm happy to go back to Sharon Johnson and see how far they got on that one.
Okay, we can come back to that. And then there's only one more that was made a long time ago that I want to do before we have to break, which is also from Councilmember Burns, and that's the property standards, complaint process, and operation. That was made on May 15th, so I don't want us to adjourn without.
I'm going to do my scoring again.
So I gave it a 3 for time sensitivity, but maybe if it's been made so long ago, we ought to deal with it. A 2 for scope, a 1 for existing policy, a 1 for community interest, and a 3 for goals and priorities.
And so that was, and I gave it an 8. 1 for time, 2 for scope, 1 for policy, 2 for interest, 2 for goals.
Got it. So I do agree that actually it should be a 1 for time sensitivity. I think it's been a conversation that's been a long time coming. You both agreed on scope and connection. I would say for community interest, probably a 2. And for goals, I would argue 2 rather than 3. And if folks are comfortable, that puts us at what, 1, 2, 1, 2, 2. Is that all right?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, we're past 10 o'clock, so I think it's time to adjourn. We've done these numbers for almost everything except for the most recent referrals, plus a few that we had reason not to. My takeaway from this is that it's gonna, the next step is gonna be the significant part of really turning this into an actual recommendation. So I would request that we show up to our next meeting, which, by the way, I'll be doing remotely if that's okay with everybody, because I'll be out of town on the morning of August 5th. I would suggest that we come to that meeting with specific ideas about what items what the options we'd want to give ourselves for the recommended timeline. So whether it's 30, 60, 90, whether it's immediately, yeah, right, or barely, right. But I think we should come. The bulk of the conversation will be doing that work, and I think the more we've thought about what a good answer to that looks like, the better off we'll be.
All right, one thing I do, so if we're talking about August, I guess I would like us to think about these referrals that were made back in May.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we're not going to place them until August, and that means they're not coming until September, maybe for some of them.
Oh, if the human services one, you mean?
Well, I mean, there's the board up thing, which is planning and development. There's the tenant landlord, that's AP&W. I mean, so if we're not going to be putting them on a calendar until next month, and we say that's there's a chance that some of these aren't coming until October. And so I think we need to just be mindful of that would be, 5 to 6 months before referrals are being heard, which seems like a pretty long time.
Yeah.
So I know we don't want to do this on the fly, but I would be happy to put some dates with some of these that have been on here for a really long time. But if we feel like we don't have time to do that, then that's okay, but.
Well, I would say some of these have both been here for a really long time and have a score of under 10. So I would say perhaps we just, again, we're just getting off the ground here. We could just send an email to the chairs of those committees saying, we believe that these items are worthy of rapid consideration, and it's been a while. Can you work to get them on the calendar? It doesn't need to be a formal vote or direction, but I think it is worth kind of just nudging right now.
So that would be property standards, as well as landlord-tenant process, board-up policy, re-entering citizens in squad room, which as the referrer, is just a discussion item, as well as the crime bulletin, just a discussion. I think, is that all for our? I think that's all that have been on here since May. So that's actually not even that many. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Am I correct there? The overlay zone, we're saying we need more information?
Well, it also got a low number, a high number. I was
Okay.
thinking the things that got a low number and are old really ought
Okay.
to be, those are things we ought to really prompt.
Okay, well, would you like me to write the email? Are we all agreeing that we're going to send an email to several of them are human services, of which I'm still the chair, I believe. I could be wrong. We're going to change
I
pretty
mean,
soon.
I would say we should send an email to the whole council, just
Okay,
reporting
perfect.
out
All right.
on what we did, and including,
Great.
that would be, agenda items.
Okay.
All right. Anything else? Seeing no further business to come before us, the referrals committee stands adjourned.
Thank you.